The courtroom fell into stunned silence as all eyes fixed on the young black teenager standing before Judge Davis, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the scorn that had been directed at her just moments earlier. For nearly 20 minutes, the judge, notorious for his sharp tongue and patronizing attitude, had berated the young woman, ridiculing her for daring to represent herself in a case deemed too serious for someone of her tender years. "You think you can fool this court," he sneered, his laughter echoing around the room as he mocked her appearance, comparing her to a child merely playing dress-up as an attorney. "This is a courtroom, not a school play." His words had dripped with disdain as he dismissed her with contempt. But then, with a voice steady and clear, the teenager began to dismantle the opposing counsel's case. Her knowledge of legal precedents and the razor-sharp precision of her arguments left the judge and the seasoned lawyers in the room utterly dumbfounded. Gasps rippled through the audience as it became evident that this was no ordinary defendant. In that moment, Judge Davis's smug expression faded into one of confusion and growing unease as he struggled to comprehend the formidable force of intellect standing before him. "My name is Imani Carter, and I stand here not as a mere child but as a prodigy of the law, fully capable of defending the rights of my client and challenging the very injustices that plague our society." "I object," one of the prosecutors had interrupted, his face reddening with frustration. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that this individual is not who she claims to be." I lifted my gaze toward the prosecutor, and with a faint, knowing smile, I responded, "Your Honor, I can provide my credentials if necessary, but I assure you that every word I have spoken today is backed by sound legal reasoning. Shall we proceed?" The judge's face turned a deep shade of crimson as he stammered, "Who are you?" His voice cracked under the weight of disbelief, and I reached into my satchel to produce a pristine document that I handed to the bailiff. The paper was quickly passed up to the judge, and as he read it, his hands trembled and his mouth opened and closed in silent shock. The audience waited breathlessly. It was not long ago that my journey began in the quiet neighborhoods of Atlanta, where at the age of 15 I had discovered my passion for justice. Growing up, I had devoured law books for leisure and engaged in debates with high school students twice my age. Despite the attention that my intellect could have drawn, I had chosen to keep a low profile, urged by my mother, a retired educator, who always reminded me of the value of humility and the importance of using my gifts for the greater good. One fateful day, while accompanying my mother to a local grocery store, I overheard a heart-wrenching conversation at the corner counter. A single mother, Ms. Renee Johnson, was in tears as she explained to the cashier that her landlord was unjustly evicting her and her 2 young children. "I have always paid my rent on time," she sobbed, "but now he claims I have violated the lease, and I have nowhere to go." My heart sank at the injustice of it all. I approached Renee with quiet determination and asked, "What exactly happened?" Through her tears, she explained that her landlord, Mr. Gordon Ellis, had accused her of having too many occupants in her apartment, an accusation that she vehemently denied, insisting that it was an excuse to raise the rent. I saw immediately that the landlord's claims were fraught with inconsistencies. I asked if she had kept copies of her payment receipts and her lease agreement, and she nodded, explaining that all her documents were safely stored in a folder at home. I felt a spark of resolve ignite within me. "Let me help you," I said firmly. Though Renee was initially incredulous, "But you are just a teenager," she whispered. I reassured her, "I have been told that before. Trust me, I know what I am doing." Over the next several days, I meticulously pored over Renee's documents, scrutinizing every detail and comparing them against the landlord's claims. It soon became apparent that Mr. Ellis's allegations were built on a foundation of lies and discrepancies. I drafted a formal letter addressed to the landlord, demanding that he cease the eviction and warning him that legal action would be pursued if he did not comply. When he ignored my letter, I assisted Renee in filing a case in small claims court. Word of our efforts spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, and soon the story of the teenager who had taken on a corrupt landlord became a local sensation. However, not everyone was impressed, many doubted my qualifications, and some even ridiculed the notion that someone my age could handle a serious legal matter. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and even some seasoned lawyers who had come to witness what they assumed would be an amusing spectacle. I dressed in a simple navy blazer and a modest skirt, determined to present myself with dignity and authority despite my youth. As I stepped up to the plaintiff's table, I could feel the eyes of the entire courtroom fixated upon me, and I sensed the sneers and whispered doubts swirling in the air. The moment of truth had arrived, and I was ready to stand for Renee's rights and for the countless tenants like her who had been exploited by unscrupulous landlords. Judge Davis, seated at the bench with an air of condescension, began the proceedings with his customary scorn. "Miss Carter," he declared, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "this is a courtroom, not a playground. What makes you think you can handle such a serious matter?" His words were met with a mixture of smirks and disbelieving glances from the audience. I maintained my composure and replied clearly, "Your Honor, I am representing the plaintiff, Ms. Renee Johnson, and I am fully prepared to demonstrate that her case is not only valid but that the evidence unequivocally shows that Mr. Ellis has engaged in fraudulent practices to evict her unjustly." The room fell silent, and even Judge Davis's mocking expression wavered for a moment as he registered my words. The prosecution, represented by an experienced attorney named Mr. Leonard Graves, attempted to undermine my credibility, arguing that my age rendered me incapable of understanding the complexities of the law. "This is absurd," he scoffed, "you are a mere child, playing at law. How can you possibly grasp the nuances of contract violations and tenant rights?" I listened to his remarks calmly, my heart pounding with a mix of determination and righteous indignation. I then proceeded to methodically present the evidence. I introduced copies of Renee's rent receipts, her lease agreement, and a series of emails exchanged between Renee and Mr. Ellis that revealed glaring inconsistencies in his claims. I cited relevant legal precedents, carefully outlining how similar cases had been ruled in favor of tenants who had been exploited by landlords. As I spoke, the courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. The seasoned lawyers in the room began to exchange bewildered glances, and even Judge Davis appeared momentarily taken aback by the clarity and precision of my arguments. "Your Honor," I stated firmly, "the evidence demonstrates that Mr. Ellis's accusations are nothing more than a fabricated excuse to force an unjust eviction. The lease clearly stipulates the allowed number of occupants, and every payment has been made in full and on time. Furthermore, the landlord's own records, which we have subpoenaed, indicate a history of similar practices, a pattern of behavior designed to intimidate and exploit tenants for financial gain." Mr. Graves objected vehemently, claiming that some of the documents were inadmissible and that I was overstepping my bounds. I maintained my composure and countered his objections with precise references to the rules of evidence. "The documents in question are vital to establishing the truth in this matter, and there is no legal basis for their exclusion," I argued. My voice resonated with authority, and the courtroom erupted into murmurs of surprise. Even Judge Davis, who had so far been dismissive, leaned forward as he considered my rebuttal. Then, as if the climax had been building for an eternity, I paused and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and unwavering, "I can provide my credentials if necessary. I have passed the preliminary legal examinations and have been mentored by respected attorneys in our community. Every word I have spoken is legally sound and rooted in extensive research and practical experience." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a small folder containing copies of my certificates, recommendation letters from prominent legal professionals, and a transcript of my scores on the state's bar review exam, evidence that I was far more than just a teenager with a penchant for books. I handed the folder to the bailiff, and the judge, his face now flushed with astonishment, took a moment to examine the documents. His previously scornful expression was replaced by one of growing respect and confusion. The seasoned attorneys in the room were rendered speechless, and even Mr. Graves could only stammer in response. The turning point was complete. The courtroom, which had earlier been filled with derision and skepticism, was now abuzz with a mixture of awe and admiration. Whispers spread like wildfire as it became evident that I was not merely a child playing at law but a gifted legal mind capable of challenging even the most entrenched injustices. Judge Davis's demeanor shifted, his earlier condescension gave way to a grudging acknowledgement of the merit of my arguments. "Miss Carter," he said slowly, his voice measured, "I must admit that I did not expect such a comprehensive and persuasive case from someone of your age. I will allow you to proceed." His words, though tinged with residual disbelief, marked the beginning of a new chapter in the trial. As the proceedings continued, I presented additional evidence that further undermined Mr. Ellis's credibility. I introduced depositions from former tenants who testified that they had experienced similar treatment and that the landlord had a history of fabricating reasons for eviction. I meticulously pointed out discrepancies in the landlord's records, citing specific instances where his claims did not match up with documented facts. Every point I made was delivered with the confidence of someone who had dedicated her life to the pursuit of justice, and with each piece of evidence, the scales of justice tilted ever more in favor of my client. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was equally charged. Reporters and spectators who had gathered to watch the trial were captivated by the unexpected brilliance of a young attorney who had upended the traditional expectations of the legal profession. Social media exploded with hashtags praising the unmasked prodigy, and calling for more opportunities for young, talented individuals to contribute to society. I received messages from people across the country who were inspired by my performance and urged me to continue fighting for justice on behalf of those who had been marginalized and oppressed. As the trial reached its crescendo, Mr. Graves, realizing that his case was collapsing under the weight of the overwhelming evidence and my unyielding arguments, attempted one last desperate maneuver. He introduced a series of financial records that purported to show that my client had received an undisclosed source of income, implying that her claims of financial hardship were fabricated. The courtroom erupted into a flurry of murmurs and gasps as the records were presented. My heart pounded in my chest as I recognized this as a calculated attempt to discredit my client and derail our case. I requested time to review these new documents, and the judge granted a brief recess. During the recess, I worked furiously with my assistant to cross-check the financial records against Renee's documented bank statements and payment logs. It quickly became evident that the figures presented by Mr. Graves were not only inconsistent with the records but also appeared to have been manipulated using basic digital templates. I prepared a detailed rebuttal, complete with annotations and a step-by-step breakdown of how the records had been falsified. When court reconvened, I presented my findings with unwavering clarity, demonstrating that the so-called evidence was nothing more than a desperate fabrication designed to sow doubt in the minds of the jurors. "The evidence you have introduced," I stated firmly, "is completely unreliable and stands in direct contradiction to the verified records in my client's possession. I urge this court to disregard these manipulated documents as they do not reflect the true financial circumstances of Ms. Johnson." My words resonated throughout the courtroom, and even Judge Davis could not ignore the incontrovertible logic of my argument. The judge's stern gaze softened ever so slightly as he acknowledged the strength of my evidence. Mr. Graves, now visibly frustrated and increasingly desperate, attempted to object once more, but his arguments were systematically dismantled by the clear, methodical approach of my presentation. The final moments of the trial were charged with an intensity that felt almost palpable. I delivered my closing argument with the passion and precision of a seasoned advocate, tying together every piece of evidence and every testimonial into a powerful narrative of injustice and resilience. "This case is not simply about a landlord's greed," I proclaimed, "but about the fundamental right of every tenant to live with dignity and security. It is about holding accountable those who would exploit and deceive for their own gain. I stand here not only for Ms. Johnson, who has suffered immeasurably, but for every individual who has ever been marginalized by an unjust system. Let the evidence speak for itself, let justice prevail." As I concluded my argument, the courtroom fell into a profound silence. The tension that had been building over the course of the trial was suddenly broken by the sound of the judge's gavel. Judge Davis cleared his throat and, after a lengthy pause during which he meticulously reviewed his notes, announced that he would deliberate on the case and render his decision in due course. The audience waited in bated breath as the gravity of the proceedings sank in. It was clear that the case had transcended the boundaries of a simple legal dispute, it had become a symbol of hope and a clarion call for fairness and accountability. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge returned to the bench. His expression was grave as he delivered his verdict. In the case of State v. Gordon Ellis, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Renee Johnson, dismissing the landlord's claims as unfounded and ordering immediate remedial action to prevent further exploitation of tenants. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers, and a sense of vindication washed over everyone present. Tears of relief glistened in the eyes of Ms. Johnson, who rushed to embrace me in a moment of quiet triumph. Yet even as the judge pronounced his ruling, the battle was far from over. Moments later, whispers of a potential countersuit from Mr. Ellis's legal team began to circulate. They planned to file a defamation suit in an attempt to recoup losses and discredit our victory. I knew that the fight for justice was an ongoing process, one that would require vigilance and unyielding resolve. In a final act that underscored my commitment to the cause, I addressed the courtroom one last time before adjourning. If my performance here today has taught us anything, it is that age, color, or background must never be the measure of one's worth or ability. Let this verdict be a beacon for all those who have been silenced by injustice. And to those watching, I invite you to share your thoughts and rate this performance in the comments below. Your support fuels our fight for truth and equality. In the days that followed, the story of the courtroom showdown spread like wildfire. News outlets, social media platforms, and community gatherings buzzed with praise for the young attorney who had defied expectations and shattered prejudices with her brilliance. I received countless messages from fellow students, veterans, and everyday citizens who were inspired by the demonstration of unmasked brilliance and the promise of a fairer society. The case became a rallying point for advocates of tenant rights and legal reform, and many sought to join forces to address the systemic issues that had enabled corruption and exploitation. Throughout the ensuing weeks, I worked tirelessly alongside community leaders, legal aid organizations, and activist groups to ensure that the momentum generated by the trial was not lost. Together, we organized forums and workshops to educate tenants about their rights, and we lobbied for reforms that would impose stricter oversight on landlords and protect vulnerable residents from unjust evictions. The journey was challenging, with many setbacks along the way, yet every obstacle only strengthened our collective resolve. Our movement grew from a small spark into a blazing beacon of hope that challenged entrenched systems and demanded accountability at every level. As time passed, I continued to be invited to speak at events and participate in public discussions about legal reform. My experiences in the courtroom had not only transformed my life but had also served as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of justice is a lifelong endeavor. I often reflected on those early moments of derision and disbelief in the courtroom, remembering how the scornful laughter and dismissive remarks had fueled my determination to prove that truth and talent know no age or color. Each step I took on this journey reaffirmed my belief that when we stand together and speak out against injustice, we have the power to change the world. In a memorable interview with a prominent national news network, I was asked, "What drives you to continue fighting when the odds seem so stacked against you?" I replied simply, "I fight because I believe that every person deserves to be heard, every injustice must be challenged, and every voice, no matter how young or marginalized, has the potential to create change. I am not defined by the limits that others try to impose on me. I am defined by my passion for justice and my unwavering belief in the power of truth." My words resonated with millions, and soon I found that my story had become an emblem of hope for those who had long been silenced by societal prejudice and systemic neglect. Over the months that followed, our collective efforts began to yield tangible results. Legislation was introduced at the state level to strengthen tenant protections, and local governments started to allocate funds for legal aid programs dedicated to assisting low-income families facing eviction. The ripple effects of the trial reached far beyond the confines of the courthouse, igniting debates in town halls, classrooms, and online forums. The narrative that had once been dominated by cynicism and defeat was now being rewritten by voices demanding justice, accountability, and equality. Even as our movement gained momentum, I remained acutely aware that our fight was far from over. The defamation suit filed by Mr. Ellis's legal team loomed as a potential challenge, one that threatened to divert attention from the core issues at stake. In the face of such adversity, I gathered my team, including dedicated legal colleagues, tech experts, and community organizers, and we developed a comprehensive strategy to counter any attempt to undermine our victory. Our approach was both proactive and meticulous. We combed through every piece of evidence, prepared counterarguments, and enlisted the support of influential figures who shared our commitment to justice. One particularly tense day, as we prepared for a hearing on the defamation suit, I received a tip that an unknown party had been attempting to discredit our case by planting false evidence online. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and determination as I realized that the battle against corruption was waged not only in the courtroom but also in the digital realm. I immediately coordinated with our tech team, and together we launched an investigation to trace the origins of the fabricated evidence. Our efforts soon uncovered a network of shady actors operating under the guise of legitimate legal professionals, all intent on protecting the interests of powerful landlords and corporate entities. This discovery only reinforced my resolve to expose the truth at every level and to ensure that those who exploited the vulnerable would be held accountable. As the defamation suit moved forward, our legal team presented a formidable case, systematically dismantling the false claims with evidence of digital manipulation and discrepancies in witness testimonies. The judge in that proceeding, a seasoned jurist known for his impartiality, listened intently to our arguments. In a moment that marked a significant turning point, he stated, "The evidence presented by the defense is not only lacking in credibility but is demonstrably fabricated. I find no merit in the defamation claims, and I urge the opposing counsel to reconsider their position." The courtroom erupted in a mixture of applause and sighs of relief, and it became clear that the forces aligned against us were beginning to crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. The victory in the defamation suit served as a catalyst for further reforms. Inspired by our successes, community leaders and advocacy groups came together to form a coalition dedicated to addressing systemic injustices in housing and tenant rights. We held public rallies, organized educational workshops, and even developed an online platform where affected individuals could share their stories and access legal resources. Every step we took was met with both support and resistance, yet the momentum of our movement could not be stopped. I found myself traveling across the state, speaking at universities, town hall meetings, and conferences, each time urging my audience to believe in the transformative power of justice and unity. Despite the challenges and occasional threats that emerged, including menacing phone calls and covert surveillance by private investigators hired by powerful interests, I never wavered in my commitment. I learned to navigate the treacherous waters of legal battles and public scrutiny with the same discipline that had once seen me through rigorous military training. I surrounded myself with a network of mentors, colleagues, and friends who bolstered my spirit and helped me to remain focused on the greater mission. Each setback was met with renewed determination, and every small victory became a stepping stone toward a future where every tenant, every marginalized citizen, and every individual with a story of injustice could find their voice. In one particularly poignant moment during a community forum, an elderly woman approached me with tears in her eyes and said, "You have given me hope when I had none. For years, I felt powerless against those who exploited me. But today, I see that change is possible, thanks to you." Her words moved me deeply, reinforcing the belief that our work was not in vain. It was a reminder that behind every legal case, every policy reform, and every courtroom victory, there were real lives being transformed for the better. As the months turned into a year, the impact of our collective efforts became evident. Legislation was passed that strengthened tenant protections and increased funding for legal aid services. Media outlets began to spotlight our coalition, and my story, once dismissed as the ramblings of a precocious teenager, was now being celebrated as a beacon of hope and a call to action for all who had been silenced by systemic injustice. I continued to work tirelessly, driven by the memory of every injustice I had witnessed and the determination to ensure that no one would ever be made to feel invisible or unworthy. Before I conclude this account, I want to take a moment to extend my gratitude to every individual who stood by our side during those turbulent times. The journey was arduous, fraught with moments of doubt and heartache, yet it was also filled with inspiration, solidarity, and the unwavering belief that justice can prevail even in the darkest of hours. I also invite you, the reader, to join the conversation. If this story has moved you, if it has inspired you to believe in the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit, please leave your thoughts, ratings, and comments below. Your feedback is essential. It fuels the movement and reminds us all that every voice matters. Unmasked Brilliance is more than just a courtroom drama, it is a testament to the indomitable power of a single individual to challenge systemic injustice and to transform society through courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. It is a story of how prejudice and derision can be shattered by the brilliance of a young mind determined to change the world. It serves as a reminder that no matter how entrenched the forces of oppression may seem, they can always be overcome when we dare to stand up and speak the truth. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you believe in the power of justice and the importance of giving every voice the chance to be heard, please show your support by leaving your rating and sharing your comments below. Together, we can ensure that stories like this continue to inspire change and that the legacy of every individual who fights for justice is never forgotten.